waiting for them to come, so we can at least start something. That's essentially good. So I came early.
Yeah,
I don't know where they're at.
it's okay. You get caption. I'll record the lecture so I can post it. Let's zoom. Try grading.
We're talking about is which are for next semester, you're gonna have this for the free.
Yeah, I can give you the file. It's a PDF. Okay, so let's just start the lecture and then when they come, they can catch up. So we are going to do the last unit, which is going to be on compliance and business continuity. We're going to do a pretty short lab on steganography and also stegananalysis. So using the tool to embed and hide data within the file, and then be able to use the tool and to extract the data from the file. So for this week, we're going to cover the last two chapters of the textbook, which is going to be chapter 14 and 15. Some of this is going to be review because the book has talked about different requirements throughout. And then you also have the same concept from the prior class, like 27 and also 41A. So it talks about how sometimes you have a global company that is span across the country and also in a different country. You have to take a look at the regulatory requirements, and that can impose some challenges on how you're able to maintain some of the areas regarding data requirement. So in the data considerations area, it touches on how you should have plans to protect your data. And this is going to draw into the business continuity plan. So data sovereignty is going to be an important area where we would look at the law or the regulation that impose upon how we store and maintain our data protection. It's important to think about data classification, data storage, data encryption. So we have to think about how data is moving in and out of the networks. And then also on how data is stored or archived within our systems. So let's go through some of the questions. In the first question, it asks you, what is data sovereignty? And why is it significant for multinational organizations? Like you have a global company, somebody like Costco or even Walmart or McDonald's, right? If you're looking at more of like the retail and hospitality type of industry. So data sovereignty refers to the regulations, the law, the rules that's going to govern the storage and the processing of data within a specific country. So when you're looking at United States, and it also depends on the industry and the compliance requirement in that industry, and then in some cases that would also refer to state law as well. But we would see that, for example, communication company, they're required to keep your text and your call logs, right, for at least 3 to 5 years on their system. So data retention can be costly when you have millions or billions of users. But you have to follow the regulations and you have to make sure that you protect the data. When we're looking at something like social media company like Facebook, Instagram, which span across the globe, you have users from everywhere, or even Google. So we have to take a look at how that can we can retain the data and how that's important. So there's a lot of discussion about TikTok and data privacy and all of that in the last, I want to say this year and last year. and the concern about data retention and where it's housed. So the data is housed in China, and China has maybe not as strict regulation compared to United States on social media type of data. And so with that, that can be a way for some of the discussion in how TikTok can improve data privacy and so on. I heard you.
How's it going?
So it is significant because multinational organization must comply with different legal requirements. So you have to think about the regions, the state, the country, for the location of your organization, and then what type of laws that's going to be applied. Okay, so that's important. So that's about data sovereignty. So when we're looking at how this can be applied to organization that planning to expand. So let's say that I am based in the United States and I want to expand across North America, which probably going to Canada and then maybe all the way down to South America. So what I have to do is I have to think about how that's going to play into my infrastructure and how it's going to, we need to adopt some kind of operation. So for the second question, it asks you, a company plans to expand into a country with stringent data sovereignty laws. What measures should it adopt before initiating the process, the operations? So first, we need to take a look at our internal data practices by auditing it. So when you say audit, that just means that you are going to go back and go through and take a look at each of the practice and how it is effective or not, right, in your organization, like data encryption, right? How we're accessing the data, or even storing the data on the database and how the database is being accessed. And then from there, you are going to consult with the legal expert, and that's going to help you further understand the need, right, for the expansion or the regulation outside of your region. And then because we house a lot of the data on the cloud, you have to take a look at how your cloud provider is going to be able to align with that expansion. And that's important. So if it's through Microsoft or if it's through AWS, we need to take a look at the compliance and the regulations. And then we want to make sure that we establish a robust data retention and destruction policy. So how you're maintaining your data and how you are removing your data is going to be important. So this needs to be established. So you have to write out the rules. And then you are going to be able to follow or apply the rules within your organization, even if it is expanding across the globe. Okay. So for this area, it touches on data ownership. So data ownership really imply on when the data is created and how it's created, the value of the data as assets within the company. If it is on company's hours and on company's machine, it's considered the property of the company. And sometimes you have the gray area where you have workers that are creating data for their own personal purposes, but storing it on the company. So it's important that we're looking at the data classes and how the data can be controlled through the classes. And so data ownership really means that the company is going to be accountable, right? Or the individual, the employee can be accountable for their own personal data, whereas the organization would be accountable for the protection of the company's data. So that means that if you are a worker within a certain organization, that organization is required to make sure that your data is safe. Okay. So data ownership is important, and that kind of shift the liability a lot on the enterprise, I think. And so the more data we have, this is the business aspect, is the data ownership really speaks to the amount of work and money that's gonna be involved for the data retention operation. So with that, we have to understand the value of your data, right? And the value of your data is also gonna tie back to the classes of data that you have. So we touch on data sovereignty for the first question here, if you just join us. And then for the third question, you can refer to the data classification section of the notes, and you can find the information there. Okay. So for the third question, it asks you explain the concept of data classification and its importance in regulatory compliance. So data classification, it entails categorizing your data or divide your data into classes based on the value and the sensitivity. So you might have highly sensitive data that's going to be in its own class. Or sometimes you would have health data only in its own class. And then you might have general data or, operational data. So it really depends on the organization that they would classify. Sometimes we would have public data where we can release that to the public, where we have private data that could also entail some private information about our employees and our operation. So it is crucial for compliance in using classification because it really ensures that we are properly handling the data. That means that we are storing it properly. We are securing it, right, on how it's accessed and used or transmitted. Because sometimes you would have web access data, that's data in motion. Or if you have storage, that will be your data at rest. But those type of data would have to be broken into classes. So if you have customer data, like transactional for retail company, what they purchase, like the purchase orders, or even transactional reference number, those things need to be in its own class, and so you would need to have the proper protection. And when the customer pull that data through the application, you've got to make sure that we use proper encryption, right? We had a chapter on that to be able to access the data. So what we would see is that including DLP, right? Data loss prevention plan, part of your business continuity plan is also very important. It is part of operation. So anything that's part of operation should be part of your BCP, your business continuity plan. Now, one of the major area that cybersecurity deals with is data leak, because data is crucial. It's a huge asset of the company. So when you have a company that basically gather, analyze data and sell that data, and you do see that for a lot of marketing purposes, data becomes just the main function or a main element of the operation. But if you're looking at other industry, if you're looking at manufacturing industry, data can also be a crucial element, because without data, we won't be able to have proper purchase order for our products. We might to be able to use to manufacture or produce other goods. Or even in a service company, your data could be related to your customer, or even the type of financial data that you are dealing with. could be month to month or day to day. So in my experience, I think when you're dealing with data, even for companies in the same industry, every organization is going to have its own unique type of practice, and also the preference on how data is maintained. For the majority, we can say that yes, we can put things on the cloud, or we can protect our servers that house a lot of these data. But you also have to know that, you know, each company is going to have its own dedicated costs on how the data is maintained through the effort of either internal or third-party type of service. Oops, sorry. What's this? You know, if you have questions. Yeah. Coming close to the end of the semester, so. This is gonna be our last required section.
Really?
Yeah, and then the first week of December, I will still be here. If you wanna come in and work on your project, I think some of my other students in other classes, they might consider that. But overall, the second week of December is going to be when we do our finals and turn in our project. So we'll talk about the project today.
There's not really that many people in the class for partnering too.
Yeah, so if you want to do your own, it's not a lengthy project. I thought about giving you guys like a capstone for security, but I think that this class, I want to teach you how to be a consultant, so it's probably more important for you to respond to RFP. I really thought about it, right? Like I tried to modify the project multiple times, so we'll touch on it today, and it's definitely doable. I don't require major plans, because if this is a capstone project for the program, it's gonna require like network layout, redesign of the network, and all the policies and all of that. I'll let the bachelor degree classes handle that. So I'm gonna teach you how to respond to an RFP if you ever have to do that, or so that way you can submit for competition with requests for proposal. Like if you see like school district, they require certain things, you can submit for it and you can win. You can get the job, right? So basically it's a bid that you put in. So let's say that they have a bid for $1.2 million to overhaul their security plan. You know, and then it would look something similar to what we're gonna see today, so on the project. Okay, any questions? So we got this part, right? So let's talk a little bit about compliance, and I think the book, it only touches on, and mind you, the author of the book, I think that he's based out of the UK, so there's a lot of emphasis about UK regulation, but it's okay to learn about that because you might be handling or manage security operations in the UK, and so you need to know European regulations. And then for our nation and overall, we're looking at national compliance requirement. I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with some of them. So for number 4, it's just a company that handles financial and health related data. And you do see a company that have this, right? They might have some kind of health services that would tie in with some financial type of data. And I kind of agree with this answer, but I wanted to add to it. So, you want to identify at least 3 regulations that they have to comply. So if they are in Europe, they have to comply with the GDPR. So if that's a European and in order to handle European citizens and across multiple countries there, right? So if I'm in the UK, I have to comply by GDPR. Now, for companies, when you see companies that are, in Australia, UK, and United States, right, they have to comply with multiple nation compliance. So for health, we are gonna deal with HIPAA, right, for the Insurance Portability Act, and that deals mostly with PHI. So anything that relates to the patients like X-ray, prescription, diagnosis, patient files, things that the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists update, that's considered under PHI. I think we have a class that focuses specifically on this. And then for financial record retention, this is for SOX compliant Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This was placed, it was created mostly to prevent organization from committing fraud, to protect the investors, like people who are investing in their stocks, the stakeholders within the company. So you often see financial records is maintained for the companies that are on stock market, that's in the exchange market. So Sarbanes-Oxley Act was implemented for that reason. So quarterly, companies have to report their financial status. So for example, you would see that Amazon or Microsoft or even Meta, aka Facebook and Instagram, right? They have to report whether they gain or lose, how their financial status is, so that way it prevents the company from tricking, right, investors into putting in money even when they're not doing well, or etc. So financial status is going to give the investors and the people who participate within the company the more knowledge in how well they're doing. Now, financial can also relate to PCI DSS if it is credit cards related. So if you are looking at like bank statements, transactional statements for Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, that will be PCI DSS, right? Now, I can have a healthcare facility accept payments, but not having to deal with PCI DSS if I outsource it. So for example, I might have an urgent care center. I would have patients that come in, they would probably have to pay for either copay or some kind of service that I'm offering during the urgent care process. Now, if I acquire a service from a company that handle all my transaction, you see those all the time, Square, you name it, right? Those companies going to then handle all my financial type of data, all the transactional information. Then I basically transfer that liability and that risk to that organization, but I have to pay a fee, right? I have to pay some kind of service fee. And this is what you see with gas station, like Arco or Shell. Sometimes they do that. When you are processing transaction, you paying like a 75 cents fee or a 25 cents fee. It's because it's helping them pay for your transaction for that service. Now, they don't have to require that if they have a lot of customers, because it's actually tier-based. So if I have, let's say, 100,000 transaction a month, I pay a certain fixed fee for that service. If I have less than that, right, it actually more, right? So let's say that I have to pay $1,000 a month for 100,000 transaction. But if it goes less than that, if it's 50,000 transaction, I have to pay per transaction a certain amount, like 75 cents. So if you charge your customer 75 cents per transaction, it just off shift the cost to the customer, but not you, right? So that can be the call of the business. Now, when you pay for that service, that the company that handles that service is going to maintain the data. But you have to make sure that you review the contract, and the contractual agreement is going to say how they're going to manage your data, right? And all of that information. Even though things are printed on the receipts, it goes to the system of the database and the system of the third party, or your partner. And then they are going to maintain it. You can still have access to it. Your customer has access to it. but you don't have to house that data. So housing data costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of a huge operation for IT and cybersecurity in maintaining that type of data. So different areas of data. So you need to make sure that you know, and then if you're dealing with young adults data, right, like K through 12, you have to have restrictions and how they're accessing the data. Like they cannot just pull everything on the internet. This is why you filter a lot with cybersecurity. Then you also have to deal with FISMA, right? So depending on the industry and the organization, so make sure that we look at the requirement. Okay, so it gives you a screenshot of how you can classify your data like this. This is a normal, like internal only or confidential, restricted, or, you know, high clearance type of data, highly secret data. And then it talks about data retention. So if you ever get into security management and taking your master's program, a lot of there's at least one class on compliance, because compliance, you know, you cannot just address it in one chapter. It's such a huge area, and you have to know all the requirements. And this is also a part of my comprehensive exam. So before they send you off with the degree, they want to make sure you know everything. Okay. So for the data type, it breaks down, and these are just some example. I think that, you know, you can span out to different type of data. So PHI, we touch on that, healthcare data. Now, if you have insurance information data, like for, let's say for this college district, right? I'm an employee here. They have information like my vaccine. I have to have updated vaccine for, you know, tuberculosis and different things, and you as student as well, right? They also have my insurance information and so on. So they also have to comply to HIPAA requirement. So if you maintain that, and so even if you're in the education industry, if you have health data, you got to make sure, not just for healthcare, right? And then financial, we touch on that. Then you got some area with intellectual property, and this kind of span across a lot of different things, from design to prototype to patent ideas to, you know, so, and then there's some gray area between, you know, an employee coming up with an idea, storing some data on your, on the system that belongs to the company who really owns it. So data ownership is going to then shift depending on the internal policy of that organization. Okay. For the most part, if you're using company's time and company resources, it belongs to the company. But attorney can argue otherwise. So, and then your personal identifiable information, this would be, and it also varied with the different countries too. I think for United States, we value the privacy of our social security number, because that's an identifiable number. But you know, that only came about in the 70s. It wasn't used before that. So for your grandparents and the people from a long time ago, if they have their social security card, it would show on there that this cannot be used as an identification card, right? But if you're looking at the social security card now, that's definitely different. They omit that because now we use it to really identify ourselves within the nation for a lot of different things, from credit cards to tax to etc. Right? Okay. All right. So for 5, it says compare the roles of PCI DSS and GDRP in regulating data security. So I mentioned earlier that PCI DSS would apply to company that take transactional or maintain transaction data for credit cards or banking. So it focuses on securing data for cardholders, right, to prevent fraud. And it's PCI DSS is important. It's important that it's in place, so that way your credit card information cannot be just floating around everywhere, even though in the data leak, the result of that, yes, we have our information in the dark web, right? Um,
You can see it.
Huh?
You can see, right?
you keep that until you're done with the
So do
call.
we all use a different USB or same one?
You can use the same one.
Same one.
Okay, and then the project is due on the 12th, right? Got you, so we're gonna come back, the week after Thanksgiving
So Monday.
on a Monday, so what time are
3:30.
3:30
To class time. I don't have class meeting that week, so till whatever time. I
to
think.
7, right?
Yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
yeah, no problem. Make sure, Mark, I told you the process, so make sure you talk to your
Yeah,
group
I'll do
about
it.
that. Right, okay.
That's why we're outside to give a group meeting.
Yeah.
All right. So PCI DSS focuses on cardholder data, and we want to make sure that that is in place to prevent fraudulent, right? And then your GDRP, it really emphasized on personal data protection. And remember that GDPR is part of the European requirement. So your personal data protection, privacy rights, and legal accountability. So it's different compared to PCI DSS that focuses on credit card information. Okay, so company would go through a thing called privacy impact assessment, your PIA. And these are just going to be the steps. Number one, you gotta identify your data types, right? Earlier we saw different type of data like personal health information, or it could be your intellectual property data. So you would first categorize your data into different types. Then from there, you would identify the risk and you go through risk assessment. Okay. And remember that your data value, your data is assets. So we would quantify that to the dollar. The easiest way for me is I would look at the amount of time that's used to create that data to the dollar per hour. So if you are looking at a clerk, right, to be able to create, let's say, a spreadsheet of all the employee salary information, that might take an hour or so, and how much you would pay that clerk and then the amount. So give or take, you have a little bit of room in your system resource use and so on. That's how we quantify the value of the data. But the value of the data can also reflect how that data can be bought and exchanged or sold. So for some company like Google, when they have your data on your browsing and that can be sold to a marketing company, let's say 50 cents for how many clicks, right? Then that can be representing the value of the data. So it can vary. When you're looking at the type of data, marketing data can be different in price in one organization, how it's used, how it's applied compared to another. And then the third area is how we're going to be implementing the safeguards. So the protection of the data, consulting stakeholders, and documenting the compliance with regulatory frameworks. So in Europe, that will be your GDPR. So when you're doing a PIA, privacy impact assessment, that's required, right? So GDPR, they require that. So you have to go through, identify your data, ask, and then do the assess your risk. And then from there, you are gonna implement protection, make sure that you make your stakeholders aware of the implementation, and then you gotta document it for compliance and auditing purposes. So I don't know any kind of compliance requirement that doesn't have an audit. So either you have a quarterly audit or you do annual audit, at least an annual audit, okay? That means you gotta go back and look at how your risk score is gonna be, and then how your protection is effective or not. So you gotta look at the effective score and so on. So managing security is about, understanding what's in place and the gap, and then how to fill that gap or improve it, right? overall, it's that. Cybersecurity is just that. Making sure that you're not losing money, because losing data is losing money. So it's very business oriented. Okay, any question? Okay, so I think there's a section, we're gonna have some questions on data removal, destruction, and sanitization. I think we touched a little bit on this, but importantly, when you're working with ISO 27001, when you're in the industry, if you ever go to conferences, you see ISO information everywhere because that's what we follow, right? We touch on this in the prior weeks. But it really address on how we can destroy or remove data, or how we should, the type of practices, right? Using shredders, you know, you can also hire a company to destroy your data. And then pulping is where we would use it for paper records. I think that now a lot of the times we're using digital type of files, but you know, if you're looking at doctor's office, you still have form gets scanned into the digital file because that's a HIPAA requirement. But yeah, at the same time, right, you have to do something with the paper file. Let's say that I have a patient and that patient doesn't come back for 7 years. I still have to maintain that physical file along with the digital file somewhere in case that person comes back, or if I need to transfer that file to a specialist or another physician, right? So there's a lot of aspect in how what we can do with the actual physical file and the logical file, and then along with how we're going to destroy them. Okay. Back in the day, people used to throw them in the trash and not care, right? It doesn't work that way anymore, right? When you go through audit for HIPAA compliant, you can't, you know, if you throw it in the trash and if that file is leaked, right, you're liable for that leak. So there's a repercussion. Okay, let's move this down in case we're still looking at that one. Okay, so for 7 is it asks you, how can a company balance the cost of implementing high security standards with risk and regulatory non-compliance, and provide some example. So first, because it is risk related, that means it's risk assessment. You always identify your critical important assets, and that will pertain to your data. So we are prioritizing critical data assets, and we want to use some kind of solutions, right? Like cloud-based solutions. So CASBs are cloud brokers to ensure that the compliance are met while maintaining the costs lower than what it should, right? Because sometimes if you're housing your own data, like if you have your own data center, it will be more costly because of the hardware and the maintenance for the system compared to if you are renting servers via cloud company. So you want to think about what kind of data is most important in your organization. And like I said, it really depends on the company and the industry, right? I can have a healthcare facility, right, compared to another healthcare facility. They're going to have similar or the same value in health information. But then other operational data, you would see different because every company would have various unique practices or people. Okay. So we want to have a scalable solution. So that means that we want to have the flexibility in how we're using cloud if we're housing that on the cloud. Okay. So an example of this would be we would only encrypt sensitive data, because if we use encryption for all data, number one, that's going to slow down the performance, right? Your output is not going to be fast. 2, that's going to cost a lot more because encryption requires software and software requires money, right? And encryption requires system resource, and system resource means more hardware, like more RAM, more processor, more, so we don't encrypt everything that is stored. We would encrypt important sensitive data. And we want to make sure that we are storing things properly. You can have things that are password protected. You can have permission control. There are many ways that you can implement proper data storage or secure data storage without spending a ton of money. Okay. Because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I'll just encrypt everything. That's not a true solution. A true solution, defense in depth, you already know, we have to have other elements. Even if you encrypt, if your algorithm is not good, then it's no good to, and that'll just be a waste. Okay. Okay. So here, I think it's important to kind of think about the location of your data, and even with cloud too, I think when you choose cloud solutions, you kind of see how you are accessing different geographic location for the cloud. When you're getting AWS, it's going to tell you like there are different data center and it's going to be like coded for the region. Now, if you're using a flexible solution, they're going to charge you based on the amount of data that you pull or uploaded, downloaded, etc. Also, depending on the data center that you access. It does not make sense for me to access data center that is in another continent, right? So we have to make sure that we think about the geographic location and also the location of the data. I think a lot of the companies now, we just outsource a lot of the data storage just to keep the cost down. But then you have to look at the contract and the service level agreement to make sure that they are protecting your data. So I think for my days, I used to see a lot of people ship out paper files to Iron Mountain, right? I think Iron Mountain is acquired and owned by another company now, but they just mostly maintain data for all the companies. So they come out with their secure truck and they pick up your boxes, your banker's box of files and things, and then they would keep it for you in a fireproof area and make sure it's protected. If you need it, right, you need 24 hours, so you just need to file an order and then they would bring it. And you do see the same thing with a lot of the services that you see now. And then we would have another company that would come out weekly to shred our data. So they would have a truck with shredders, and then they also have bins where you can deposit your sensitive paper file and they would shred it or pulp it for you. That's also including media like micro SD, CD, disk, and also drives. There are boxes for different things or containers. So location is also important. And then so something that, because we live in California, we need to think about the California Consumer Privacy Act. And you see a lot of the privacy notification that comes to your snail mailbox, right? Which is your post office mail, along with your regular email box, because of CCPA. California has different requirement as far as privacy compared to other states. So that means that you have the right to know that your information is being collected by the company. They have to notify you that they are collecting your information, right? So for an internet-based or a web-based company, assuming that, so you always make an assumption that you are going to have customers that's going to be in various states that will require this, right? So you got to make sure that you address that. Okay, here it talks about cloud provider. And then a little bit more information about PCI DSS. That stands for Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council. or I'm sorry, DSS. This is the console that overlooks the PCI DSS. Okay. So let's touch on the next question. For question A, it says, why might business opt for a warm site instead of a hot site in the disaster recovery, despite the latter advantages? So we know that a hot site means that it is a physical building with all the equipment that looks just like your regular location, right? So if I'm looking at something like the McDonald's down the street, another hot site for a McDonald's is gonna be the exact duplicate of it elsewhere, right? They will not put it in the same city. It might be in the adjacent city or in a different state, etc. So a hot site is a place where you can just go there and be able to pick up the same operation. You don't have to, you just turn on the light and be ready to go, right? That can be very costly. If you're using a hot site, normally they would have, like, let's say if we're looking at a bank, another location, another branch that is operational that will be able to house, more people and more customer as a hot site. Most companies, unless it's data center, they usually don't have hot sites because it doesn't make sense to have like an empty building that's always running with some people in it, but without regular operation, right? A warm site is something that's less than a hot site. That means that I have maybe like the physical building, some systems in it, maybe one person occasionally maintaining it. It needs a little bit more adage or additional systems and people in order to become a hot site. So a warm site is usually just something that is a little bit less and at less cost. So here we can say that warm site is more cost effective, and it can be ready to use with a little bit of effort and a little bit more system, right? It's not comparable to a hot site because the hot site is faster in recovery. So if you have a hot site, you're just ready to go the next hour. Where if we have a warm site, that can take a little bit longer. And if you have a cold site, that just be an empty building, maybe a chair or a desk, with no system, right? No people. So you have to move things in, you got to kind of build things out a little bit more. So that takes longer, and you have to start a little bit closer to the ground compared to a warm or a hot site. So the cold site is going to require a lot more implementation and improvement once you want it ready to go, right? So for a hot site, maintenance cost is going to be high, and it's going to, for overtime, if you don't use it, right, that's going to be considered a loss. So this is why now most companies now, they're considered mobile hot site. So they would put things on wheel, or so that way they can move it from city to city. When you're looking at things like storms, fire, natural disasters, those type of mobile hot sites are critical, right? I think military uses mobile hot sites as well. So when you're looking at the comparison across the three, your cold, your warm, and the hot site, which one do you recommend for an e-commerce company and why, right? So we would say a hot site is ideal because business rely on web presence. That means I have to be available 24/7 all the time. So if you have downtime, means you have loss in profit. And so if you don't have something ready to go, in the case that if your system goes down or the building that house your system goes down, then you're gonna eat that cost. So ideally, we would have a hot site. Now, in the case that if I go cloud with this, right, I have an e-commerce company, an online retailer. I have a cloud company, right? And cloud company has their recovery plan. But we can't rely on it 100%. So we also have to have a recovery solution in the case that we have cloud, because if Amazon gets wiped out, right? So that's what happens sometimes when you have outages, is that the majority of the company uses a certain service. And then if that one service, that one company that offer everybody the service goes out, like AWS, you're done, right? You just sit and duck. So you have to have alternative solution, maybe a secondary provider that house your recovery cloud systems, your failover systems. And they have to also geographically not be in the same country and state where you are, because if something happens, right, we're able to rely on that. Okay. So I think cloud-based recovery solutions are preferred nowadays. Now, if you can, so cloud is only effective if you can connect. That's the issue. Everybody keeps telling me, oh, cloud is cheap and I said, cloud is cheap, cloud is good. But if you don't have internet connection, you cannot spin your instances up. You cannot connect to it. You cannot configure it. What's the point of having it? So that means that if your internet connectivity to your wide area network is down, you're done, right? So we have to consider like recovery options like satellite and other things. So this is why when you're looking at a hot site for like a mobile hot site, most company, they have a satellite system built into that, right? If you're looking at the military, they have satellite system or communication system that's gonna be connecting directly onto the landline, be able to go. Okay. And then this kind of come back to the earlier sections a bit. So, you do see company that might have a legal hold, right? A legal hold is where there's some investigation or there's some auditing processes that's happening, that there's a requirement with the legal aspect in how your data is going to be examined. So during a legal hold, a company's standard data retention policy requires the deletion of the records. What should the company do, right? So during the legal hold, you cannot do what you normally do. I actually worked for a company that had a legal hold for 2 years, right? It's so different because everything you delete, you have to report, and then they also check the deletion. I worked for a company that was under the investigation of the FBI. You asked me why I was there for 2 years for so long. Salary was good, and then I was still in school, so I had to kind of bite the bullet and kept on going, right? But yeah, so during the legal hold, you cannot just you cannot do your normal routine in your data retention. All your data needs to be preserved. That means that, you have to think twice about what you're deleting, okay? If it has any relevant information to the case, you have to document it and making sure that you're just not deleting it, because then they're gonna say that it's a fraudulent or you're trying to hide information for the company, and you don't want that, okay? So your process is going to change, and that's important to think about, okay? And when does the legal hold happens? Like I said, if there's some accusation or there's litigation, there is a legal hold, and you have to go through the process. So with that, IT and cybersecurity team has to do change management, and then we have to think about like how we would modify the policy. So what happens is we remove we restrict on how people empty their recycle bin on the desktop. And then we would examine all of that. So a regular user cannot just put things in the trash anymore, right? Which, sometimes you download something and then you just want to delete it and it goes into your recycle bin and you empty that. But when you're working for that company that has a legal hold, you cannot just simply do that. So, and then you have to notify the user that that's what's happening. But yeah. Okay. And then for 11, it says, what is the role of ISO 27001? I think we touched on this earlier in managing data removal and destruction. It gives you the standards for securing data handling. What happened to Nas? Oh, she went outside.
Yeah.
Okay. Including data destruction, and then ensuring organizations follow the best practices. You can clip this from the notes to mitigate risk of data breaches and unauthorized recovery. So the standard help the company handle data better or maintain your data better. And then when you remove your data, you can follow the guidelines based on the standards to be able to make sure that you properly destroy your data. So when you're looking at security solutions that implemented this, right, that just entail all of those elements, right? How the data is handled, how the data is destroyed, how the data is maintained or accessed, and protected in the organization. So they sell a solution like this out of the package all the time. So this might be something that you should include in your response to the RFP, right? Considering that we're looking at a healthcare facility, even though it's a medium-sized one. Okay. So in the business continuity plan, we have to think about what is our downtime, what is our recovery time, right? And that is going to help us build out the processes and the solutions, whether it's technical or whether it's service, to be able to make sure that we recover fast enough. So for number 12, it says, how does the concept of maximum tolerable downtime, your MTD, guide disaster recovery strategies? Because we have to look at the maximum allowable downtime or tolerable downtime, your MTD, is going to be the value that you use for the maximum. Your recovery time has to be less than that value, right? Less than that maximum value. So in that sense, we would say the MTD sets the maximum acceptable downtime for the critical services. Okay, so if we are an e-commerce or we're an online retail company, our maximum downtime is going to be minimal. It's going to be very low, right? Your customer, we have to think about from a customer perspective. If I visit your store online, if your store is down at 1 a.m. in the morning, likely that in an hour or two, I would revisit your site. But if your store is consistently down for a day or two, I will not likely revisit your store, right? So that's the perspective. So statistically, we have to look at how a consumer would be able to likely that we lose a customer or not, right? For an online store. But a maximum allowable downtime can also be different for a restaurant, a healthcare facility. So it could vary for the business. If you're looking at a hospital, that's different than a regular doctor's office, like a medical group. But if you're looking at an urgent care center, that's going to be different than your hospital that has ER or other things. So So you want to make sure that it is going to be the value that you would observe to make sure that you are looking at your critical services. Okay. Like if we're looking at a grocery store, that's going to be checkout, right? That transactional system and checkout. If your transactional system is down, nothing can happen. I don't care if your inventory database is on, that would have a more higher maximum tolerable downtime compared to, you know, what you see with transactional. Because if people cannot process their purchases, right, you will not have profit and you will not have your business operation doesn't continue. So that's also a minimal value for a retailer. So we want to make sure that we recover your objectives that's going to align with that. So your recovery time is going to be less than your maximum tolerable downtime. One thing I didn't mention about the ISO, so there's the ISO 31000 or 31,000 standard, right? This is for risk management. I think we had a chapter on risk as well. So you can go to the ISO website to be able to see the standards that will be related to us. So here it touches on CMMI methodology, and this is going to be for software development processes. That's going to help decrease the risks in software service or your SaaS. Could be cloud-based. So NIST, we're going to follow NIST frameworks for most part, right? That's going to give you, NIST documentation is important in this industry. So you have to go to the publication and guidance, and you can find mostly everything that you need for cybersecurity through NIST. The industry already provide you with that, the SP800, and then you have the dashes for specific things. So like if you're looking at verifiable personal information, right? Or if you're looking at things for FISMA, so they have guidelines for you to follow. Okay. Earlier I mentioned that for kids that are under age, you gotta make sure if you work for like school district or things that offer to children, like that could be video streaming, online gaming, things like that for kids under age. So 12 and under, that's under COPPA. Okay, COPPA. This is why when you're using like services like YouTube, like for example, when I upload my video on YouTube, it asks me, is this for kids or not, right? Kids are restricted to certain content online, and so this require their privacy protection. And so this is where if you look at websites, like even for purchases, things like that, it asks for the age, like tobacco and alcohol, but there's content. So kids are inputting their information into the website, like children's game website and so on. We have to comply by COPPA. Okay. And the FTC controls that. So here it talks about how you can get fined if you don't follow the regulation. Okay. So sometimes they can go through and get certifications or accreditation for, you know, aligning with certain standards. And then here's your cloud-based service information. And it talks about different level 1 and level 2. So for your cloud service provider with the level 1, you have to do a self-assessment. Basically, it's like answering the questions to kind of see, it would look something like this. Questionnaires. For level 2, another organization is going to assess you. And they're gonna align it with the ISO standards and your cloud matrix. And of course, level 2 is because it's extra assurance that's gonna be a little bit higher in cost. So there are different star level for that. So here it talks about legal considerations, but let's go through and answer the next set of questions. I know that there will be a section in following that talks about horizontal and vertical scaling. And we want to give an example for this. So horizontal scaling, it really means that we can add like more machines, more systems, right? You can add additional servers for a certain type of service. While if you're doing vertical scaling, you can upgrade your hardware. So horizontal just mean add more systems. Vertical just upgrade your existing system. Like we can add more RAM, right? We can upgrade our software to a newer version to close out the vulnerability. So horizontal scaling is for scalability to grow and redundancy, to have additional availability of the system. Vertical scaling really means that we are going to be able to, we do have growth, but in a different way for performance, right? Vertical scaling is really addressing performance, where horizontal scaling is really addressing growth, like more people, more users, right? More services in the company. Almost done. And then we'll talk about the project. And then we'll do the lab. Let me move 13 down. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so for number 14, it says, what are the risks of not having a business continuity plan in place? We touched a little bit about business continuity plan at the earlier questions. So the risks would include longer downtime, right? Or even eventually lose business. You're gonna have financial loss for sure. You might face legal consequences. So penalties could be fines, sometime worse. And then ultimately that's going to be credibility and reputation. So that would be the areas that we would think of. Statistically shown that if a company doesn't have business continuity plan, that company would usually get shut down within the first 3 years based on the what is that, the business impact, I forgot, association or whatever statistic. So whether your business continuity plan would include like, just without like the technical information, but you have to have one. Okay. I think regulation for many of the compliance requirement, you have to have some kind of plan in place. Whether it's basic or advanced, you have to have something. And so when you are planning for business continuity, you have to think about your critical function. And for us, it needs to be critical system for those functions, right? Like I said before, if you're looking at grocery store, retailer store, or even, the general department store like Walmart, Target, the essential function is the checkout function, right? People can walk around the store and look at all the items in the store, right? But if you cannot sell those products, you cannot check it out, then you will not gain any profit. So why is mission essential function important for business continuity? Because critical function, if they're being disrupted or, if it doesn't happen, that really leads to business failure ultimately. Okay. And so we want to mitigate that, and that needs to be part of the plan. And so for CASB, that stands for Cloud Access Security Broker. And when you're using a multi-cloud environment, this helps you streamline or centralize, I shouldn't say streamline, centralize control of your cloud, such as encryption, DLP, data loss prevention, compliance monitoring across multiple cloud providers. So RCCD uses multiple cloud provider. You usually have a mixed environment where we would have Azure and AWS, okay? Or you would have other products within. Why? Because certain products are good for certain things, right? Or if I have applications that's oriented to a certain cloud. So for a company that use Microsoft product, then likely that you're gonna see Azure, because that's gonna house email, data that can go online, like your OneDrive for the individuals, employees, and then you have other things that are company related that transition over time. So if they're using Microsoft product, likely they're gonna use Azure, but they might use AWS because AWS might provide performance for other type of services, right? And then if you're using one type of cloud, you're gonna have a single point failure anyway. Or, in the case of if that cloud provider get disrupted, you're done, like what we said before. So you are gonna have a multi-cloud environment for most part. So we are gonna use the Cloud Access Security Broker that's gonna help us, right, centralize multiple types of cloud, multiple providers into one controller, one management console, one place. Okay. Now, do you have other software and other solutions for that? Yeah, somebody can sell you a solution that you can group everything up, but out of the box, your cloud service provider has feature that would allow you to use, such as the security broker. And now when you store your data, we don't want to centralize the storage. I think traditionally, long ago, that might be an ideal solution. You might put it into like your database servers, all your critical data goes there, right? But now if you have a distributed environment, I think that's gonna help because you don't have a single point failure. So when you're distributing your data across different providers, like your cloud providers, or different servers in different locations, different data center, that's going to give you redundancy for one thing, and also your recovery is going to be more effective. Because I have options to pull from multiple locations. So if you have something like, if you can implement RAID 5 or RAID 6 redundancy, that's going to allow you to reduce the risk of disruption. And you want to kind of span your data across, right? So most organizations would say, oh, I would have a file storage or a file server that's going to house all my data, but if that server is down or if it's not accessible, then you don't have a good solution. So you have to have multiple servers. You need to have, and your servers need to not just be at HQ office. You have to have it in various locations, right? So with that, we have to consider divergence or diversity in our solutions. So in the case where if you have a company that face 0-day attacks frequently, it shouldn't, right? 0-day attacks is because existing vulnerability is not reduced or omitted. And that is mostly software oriented. So if you know your CVEs, then that should not happen. Anyway, so if they face frequent 0 days attack, how can divergency in the vendor solutions reduce this risk? And so if you have diversity in vendor solutions, that means that we have options. So if you're using one vendor, you need to have various options for the same thing. That's what it's saying. Or you're using multiple vendors for that same solutions, right? Often this is ideal, right? It's an ideal concept. Enterprises that have money would be able to do that. But when you're diversifying vendor solutions, when you have options for the same thing, then you can minimize the impact for the vulnerability. Because if you're looking at a single exploit, it will not compromise the entire network. So the reason why we diversify vendor solutions is that, it changes your vulnerability aspect. You will not have the same scale in vulnerability if you are diversifying your solution. Okay. So let's say that if I only use one software company, right, to write all my software for all my applications for my business, like from my financial system to my web applications and all of those things, likely that if they're using a vulnerable module for some of those things that I'm gonna face, right, 0-day attack on it for that area. But if you're using multiple company, like I would have, 2 companies that's gonna handle my web app, one from the front end and one on the back end, and then I would use another company for, account payable applications and various things. What you would see is that you would reduce the risk you would lessen the vulnerability because each company would be able to design your software in a different way, with different approach, and likely that they would have, yes, vulnerabilities, but different vulnerabilities, right? Not just one area of vulnerability where you would then face the same attack or similar attacks. So that's why they're saying now that in the management strategy, you should consider that type of things. And I think we learned about SOAR, SOAR before. Oops. Windows. Okay. So for 19, it says, how would you use security orchestration automation response platform to mitigate phishing attacks? So phishing attack, we already know that lures the user into committed actions, right? Like clicking on a link, providing some kind of information. So if we want to use security orchestration, automation, and response, we would want, number one, automate detection. And phishing attack can be set with rules, right? System can check for certain type of activities or behavior. And also, we can simply start with like email rules. Okay. We can quarantine suspected email. So we want to be able to, we can automate that by setting the rules on the email server, having it check that. And then it would then automatically notify the user. You can use playbooks to guide responses and actions and minimize human error. And playbook just consists of approaches or methods that is effective in controlling or applying security solutions, right? So for example, in my playbook, I would say, oh, this is the type of firewall settings that I would have for, to prevent a certain type of attack. And because it was effective previously, I would then include that in my playbook. So for your playbook, usually would consist of different solutions for security implementations. Okay, and then lastly, why is third-party attestation of compliance more trusted than self-assessment? For most part, I think for compliance now, you are required to have third-party audit, right? So independent audits validate compliance objectives. It also increased trust among stakeholders and reduce bias for inherent self-assessment. So, we often see bias for the internal company doing assessment because it's often done by, if they don't have a security team, it's done by the IT team. And bias can be created that, through overlooking something because it's already in place, right? Or they would say, oh, this is a new thing that we just implemented. We don't have to look at that. We would look at other things. So audit bias is important. Now, you can become an independent auditor, right? I'll show you the certifications for that. So having ISACA or ISA certification is critical. So CISA, you can go find certifications. So I think I have to check to see if we can actually get membership for students for this. I've asked them this. So you see on there, the CISA is first on the list. You can pursue this certifications and that will be helpful with your career. And then you can also become an independent auditor, or an internal auditor, right? So having the certifications just validate that you can audit in IT. We have a certificate for this. It was written by Mr. Loya. We haven't really offered some of the classes. I will revamp a couple of the classes and keep those classes. I don't know if I'm going to keep the certificate. But it's definitely an important area. I know CIS8 is IT auditing, and that class needs to be updated. But anyway, you can go for this type of certification and you can go through the website. You can take the practice test to see how it fits. The concept is pretty high level, but it teaches you how to audit certain area of the systems. So, and then you can look at the materials. So it gives you suggestion, and of course, you can buy their product, but you can find review books and review resources online from other sources as well, right? Roughly, you're gonna see that it's close to CompTIA. And then they have others too, if you're interested. Okay, any questions regarding assignment? I'm gonna stop the video and then I'll start the video again because I want to keep them separate videos so that way you don't have to watch the whole thing to look at the project requirement. So we'll talk about the project now. And it's not complex. You can do it individually or you can do it with a partner if you want to do that.